I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The sunlight was soft, spilling through the bedroom window, dust motes floating lazily in the warm air. I stretched, rubbed my eyes, and tried to shake off the grogginess, humming quietly to myself. Today was my birthday. Not a huge celebration, but a small, quiet one with my husband, Terrence, and our two children, Alani and Zion. I had always loved birthdays quietly, never needing grand gestures. Even as a child, I found joy in the little things: a candle flickering on a small cake, a handwritten note, a smile from someone who cared. And over the years, I carried that same hope into my marriage. A thoughtful card, a gentle reminder, perhaps a bouquet of flowers, or breakfast made with love. I didn't need much, just a small acknowledgement that the day mattered. That morning, I tiptoed to the kitchen, expecting Terrence to greet me with that quiet smile he always wore in the early hours. But the kitchen was empty, coffee had not been made, the table was bare. I sighed softly, telling myself he was probably running late. I brewed my own coffee and set a small plate of scrambled eggs on the table. I smiled faintly, thinking maybe he would notice later. Maybe he would pause in the middle of the day and say, "Happy birthday, my love." The hours passed. Alani and Zion came bounding into the kitchen for breakfast, full of energy. "Happy birthday, Mom!" they chirped, wrapping me in tight hugs. I laughed and hugged them back, savoring the warmth and love in that moment. But Terrence didn't appear. By mid-morning, I was quiet, sitting at my desk with a stack of bills and emails, trying to focus, trying to distract myself from the little ache that had begun to settle in my chest. I had given so much to this family. Every day, I managed the house, the children's schedules, the grocery runs, the doctor visits. I cooked, I cleaned, I listened, I planned. And yet, today, my birthday, he seemed to have forgotten. I tried not to let it hurt too deeply. I told myself it wasn't intentional. Maybe he had a busy morning. Maybe he had forgotten. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my own silent expectations. It wasn't just about today. It was about every moment I had quietly sacrificed, every sleepless night I had endured, every compromise I had made without complaint. Terrence finally came home that afternoon, and I braced myself. I had imagined how this would go. Perhaps he would enter with a smile, a card in hand, flowers even. Perhaps he would hug me and say something simple but heartfelt. "I love you, and I remember you." Instead, he walked past me, his eyes focused on the television remote in his hand. "Hey," he said casually, not even glancing at me. I felt a jolt of disappointment, sharp and sudden. My stomach twisted. For a moment, I froze, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether my feelings were valid. I had spent years giving, and now I felt invisible. I took a slow breath. "Terrence," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm. "Today is my birthday." He glanced at me briefly, barely registering my words. "Oh, really?" he said, a hint of irritation in his tone. "I guess I forgot." I wanted to cry, but instead I swallowed hard. I remembered all the nights I had stayed awake with Alani when she had nightmares, the evenings I had cooked while he watched television, the countless bills I had paid quietly, the grocery runs, the school projects, the little sacrifices that had built this family and this home. And none of it had mattered enough to earn a single thoughtful gesture today. I walked to the kitchen window and gazed outside, watching the children play in the yard. The sunlight fell softly across their faces, and I felt a quiet ache in my chest. How had it come to this? How had the man I loved, the man I had built a life with, become so absent in noticing me, not just today, but in countless small moments before? A few days before, I had been reflecting on our life together. I remembered how Terrence and I had met at a community event, both shy, both unsure, but drawn to each other. His laugh had been warm, infectious. His eyes sparkled when he smiled. And I, Amani, had felt seen in a way I never had before. We had fallen in love slowly, naturally, almost effortlessly. We married 2 years later, promising to support and cherish each other through all the ups and downs. And in the beginning, he did. He noticed the little things. He complimented me. He made time. But life changed. Work pressures mounted. Bills piled up. Children demanded attention. And somewhere along the way, I had begun to fade into the background. Still present, still giving, but increasingly unnoticed. I had tried to speak up before, gently, subtly. I stayed up late helping the kids with homework, I'd say. I had a long day at work too. And sometimes he would nod, maybe mutter a thanks, and the moment would pass. But nothing truly changed. And now, today, my birthday, it was painfully clear. The man I had given everything to had forgotten, and it hurt more than I could have imagined. That afternoon, after Terrence had gone into the living room, I sat with a notebook and began to write. I didn't write angrily. I didn't write to scold. I wrote to remember, to acknowledge myself. I listed every sacrifice I had made quietly, every effort that had gone unseen. Each entry brought tears, but also a strange relief. I was finally seeing myself. I was finally honoring my own hard work, even if no one else had. Alani peeked in and asked softly, "Mom, are you okay?" I smiled faintly, brushing my tears aside. "I'm fine, baby." Just thinking Zion came in next, tugging at my hand. "Mom, let's play." And I realized in that quiet moment that while Terrence had forgotten today, my love and my attention were still making a difference. The children saw me. They felt me. They appreciated me. And perhaps that was enough to keep me grounded, to remind me that my efforts were not in vain. That night, Terrence did not apologize. He did not bring flowers. He did not even acknowledge the date beyond a quiet, distracted good night. I went to bed feeling a mix of sadness and quiet resolve. I realized that I couldn't rely on someone else to validate my worth. I had to see it myself first. And yet, as I drifted off to sleep, I also held a quiet hope. Hope that someday he would notice, truly notice, and that the love we had shared could be rebuilt, not through grand gestures, but through acknowledgement, presence, and small, consistent acts of care. The days after my birthday passed quietly, but the weight of that forgotten day lingered in the corners of our home. Terrence went about his routine as if nothing had happened. Breakfasts were rushed, evenings were filled with television and phone scrolling. I, Amani, moved around the house carrying out my responsibilities, laundry, school lunches, grocery lists, all while trying to mask the ache of being unnoticed. I noticed myself growing quieter, less eager to share details of my day or to ask for help. Small comments that once might have sparked conversation now went unsaid. I started cooking extra portions of dinner, not for attention, but because it felt safe, predictable. I realized I had begun to shrink, in subtle ways, into the spaces that Terrence left unfilled. One evening, as I was clearing the dinner plates, Terrence walked in from work, dropping his briefcase on the couch. "You made enough for a small army again?" he said, a light teasing tone, but there was a subtle edge in his voice. I paused, gripping a plate a little too tightly. "It's just dinner," I replied softly, trying not to let irritation creep in. He shrugged and sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "I don't know why you bother sometimes." Nobody even notices half the time his words hit me like a small, cold wave. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I notice, Terrence. I notice everything I do, and maybe that's what matters." He didn't respond, just looked up briefly with a faint, dismissive smile before returning to his screen. I felt the tension growing inside me over the next week. Every unacknowledged effort, every small oversight, started to feel larger than life. I caught myself counting the hours I had spent cleaning, cooking, and managing the children's schedules. I remembered nights I stayed awake comforting Alani after nightmares, evenings I sacrificed sleep to help Zion with science projects, the careful planning of family events. And yet, it seemed invisible to the one person I had built a life with. I began keeping a mental ledger of everything I did. Not to shame Terrence, but to remind myself that my effort mattered, that I mattered. One afternoon, Terrence came home visibly tired from work. I had prepared a small snack for the kids and him. "Hey, Terrence, I made a little something for us before dinner," I said, placing the tray on the counter. He glanced at it and frowned. "You really don't need to do all this every day. Can't we just order something?" His words were careless, but they struck at the core of my fatigue and frustration. I felt my chest tighten. "I like doing it," I said softly, but there was a tremor in my voice. It's part of caring for our family. He rolled his eyes slightly. Well, maybe sometimes it feels like too much. Maybe you overdo it. I swallowed hard, reminding myself to stay calm. But inside, I felt the anger and hurt building. Every small dismissal, every overlooked effort, compounded the loneliness I had been carrying for months. Alani noticed the change in our home dynamic too. One morning, she tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, are you mad at Dad?" I smiled faintly, brushing her hair back. "No, baby. I'm just thinking." "But you're sad," she said softly, looking up at me with wide, observant eyes. I knelt down, holding her tiny hands. "Sometimes people don't notice what we do, Alani. But that doesn't mean it isn't important. It's okay to feel sad." She nodded slowly, and I realized in that moment how much our children were observing, silently learning from our interactions. If I carried resentment quietly, they would notice. If I carried patience and calm reflection, they would notice too. Over the next week, the tension between Terrence and me seemed to grow quietly but steadily. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, folding laundry, when he walked past me muttering, "You spend so much time doing things for everyone else. Sometimes I wonder if you ever think about yourself." I stopped mid-fold, holding a shirt in my hands. "I do think about myself, Terrence. But I also care about our family. Isn't that part of what marriage is?" He shrugged and walked into the kitchen. "I guess. Sometimes it just feels like you're working too hard for nothing." I sat there, feeling a combination of hurt and frustration I could no longer keep silent about. "Terrence, do you hear yourself? I do everything I can for this family, every day, night after night, and all you see is me working too hard for nothing. I stay awake when the kids are sick. I plan meals and schedules. I handle bills. I do all of it quietly. And you don't notice." There was a long pause. He didn't respond immediately. I could feel the tension thick in air, my chest tight, my hands trembling slightly as I spoke. Finally, he looked at me with a flicker of surprise. I didn't realize it felt that way to you," he admitted softly. That night, we had a long, quiet conversation. Not an argument, not a fight, but an unearthing of months, maybe years, of quiet resentment, unspoken needs, and overlooked effort. "I know I should have noticed," Terrence said, his voice calm but filled with remorse. I didn't see it. I was caught up in work, in stress, in everything else. But I see it now. I see you." I felt my heart ache and swell at the same time. Relief, yes, but also lingering sadness. "It's not just about today, Terrence. It's about every day we spend together. I can't feel invisible anymore. I can't keep giving and feeling unseen." He nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. "You're right. I need to pay attention. I want to. It didn't know how to notice before." I reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "It's not about perfection. It's about trying. And noticing." That's all I need. Even with that conversation, the tension didn't vanish immediately. Old habits die slowly. He still sometimes glanced at his phone during dinner, forgot small household details, or left tasks for me to complete. But there was a subtle difference. The acknowledgement was there now, even if imperfect. Even small gestures, a "thank you for lunch," noticing the freshly folded laundry, a hug at the right moment, felt monumental because they carried intention and recognition. Alani and Zion noticed the shift too. Malik's older cousin Andre came to visit one weekend and commented on how the family dynamic seemed warmer, calmer. "It's like everyone's paying attention to each other now," he said, and I smiled quietly knowing the change had begun, even if subtly. I also began reflecting more deeply on my own role, my own expectations, and my own need for acknowledgement. I realized that while I could guide, nurture, and care for my family, I could also set boundaries, express needs, and insist on recognition. Silence may keep the peace temporarily, but speaking truth fosters connection. I started keeping a journal, a quiet ledger of gratitude, effort, and reflection. Every day I wrote a small note to myself. I am seen. I matter. My love matters. And even when Terrence forgot, even when the small gestures weren't perfect, these words reminded me that my worth wasn't tied solely to external recognition. One evening, Terrence brought home a small bouquet of wild flowers. No note, no fanfare, just flowers. I looked at him, surprised. "I noticed you were tired today." "And I thought you deserved something," he said quietly. I smiled, tears welling up softly. "Thank you. That matters." And for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension ease, the silent ache soften. Not completely gone, not yet, but the recognition had started. The acknowledgement had begun. And that made all the difference. A few weeks after our quiet conversation, life seemed to settle into a gentle rhythm. Small acknowledgments from Terrence, subtle gratitude, and quieter evenings filled with family moments offered a fragile sense of peace. Yet, beneath it all, a quiet tension lingered. One evening, after putting Alani and Zion to bed, I sat in the living room, folding laundry, when Terrence came in, holding an envelope. He looked hesitant, almost unsure of himself. "Hey, Amani, I got something for you," he said quietly, extending the envelope toward me. I took it slowly, curiosity mixed with cautious hope. I opened it, and inside was a handwritten letter. The paper was slightly crumpled, the handwriting familiar, Terrence's but different, softer, more thoughtful. I don't really know how to say what I feel," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you, about us, about how I've treated you, and I realized I've taken too much for granted." My heart beat faster. I had waited for acknowledgement for so long, silently yearning for him to see me, to truly notice the work and love I poured into our family. "I'm sorry," he continued. "I forgot your birthday. I didn't see how hard you work, how much you do for our family every single day. I want to do better. I want to notice. I want to be present." Tears pricked my eyes, and I set the laundry aside, taking his hand. "It's not just one day, Terrence. It's the little things. Every day. The quiet work that makes this family run. The nights I stay awake when the kids are sick. The meals I plan. The schedules I juggle. That's my love, my effort, my care." He nodded, squeezing my hand gently. "I see it now. I promise to notice, to acknowledge, to be present, and not just in words, but in actions." The next few days were different. Terrence began small, meaningful gestures. He made Alani's favorite pancakes for breakfast one morning, surprised me with a coffee while I worked, and even offered to handle a grocery run, something he had rarely done before. I felt my heart lighten, yet part of me remained cautious. Years of unnoticed effort had taught me that change could be fleeting, but there was sincerity in his actions, a quiet consistency that gave me hope. One Saturday afternoon, we decided to have a family picnic in the backyard. The sun was gentle, filtering through the trees, and the children's laughter filled the air. Terrence helped set up the blanket and basket, his presence more intentional than I had seen in months. As we sat together, Alani handed me a small flower she had picked from the garden. "For you, Mom," she said shyly. Zion leaned against my shoulder, smiling. "We love you, Mom." I looked at Terrence, who had a soft smile on his face, eyes reflecting a mix of love and regret. In that moment, I felt a surge of gratitude, tempered by the memory of the birthday he had forgotten. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Terrence and I sat on the porch, drinking warm tea. The air was cool, filled with the distant sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said softly, "about how I've been blind to so much. And I realize I don't just want to say sorry. I want to show it. I want to be the husband you deserve." I nodded slowly, feeling both hope and caution. "It's not just about saying sorry, Terrence. It's about noticing. Being present, being aware of the quiet work, the small sacrifices that make a family thrive." He looked at me, eyes glistening slightly. "I see it now. I promise, Amani, I'm going to try every day to see you, to appreciate you, to be here, truly." The next morning, I woke to the smell of breakfast. Terrence had made a small tray of eggs, toast, and freshly brewed coffee. He quietly placed it beside me in bed. "I wanted to start the day by showing you I notice you," he said. I smiled softly, feeling warmth bloom in my chest. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of recognition and care I had longed for. That day, as we went about our usual routines, I found myself watching him more closely, not with suspicion, but with quiet observation. I noticed the way he smiled at the children when they did something funny, how he paused to fold a towel or help with homework. He was trying. He was present. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of distraction, still times when I felt the old ache. But the difference now was subtle, yet profound. He was noticing, and I was being seen. A few days later, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had been through. I realized that the turning point wasn't just the forgotten birthday, or even the heartfelt letter. It was the moment we both acknowledged the gap between expectation and awareness, when we truly saw each other, with all our flaws, all our efforts, and all our love. That recognition was transformative. It reminded me that relationships are fragile, but they can grow stronger when both people are willing to see and acknowledge each other's contributions. Silence and oversight can erode connection, but awareness and intention can rebuild it. I also noticed a change in myself. I felt more willing to express my needs, to speak up without fear or resentment. I learned that love requires both giving and communication, and that being seen is not just about grand gestures, but about consistent acknowledgement. One evening, I caught Terrence quietly watching me as I helped Zion with his homework. He didn't interrupt, didn't comment, but his eyes reflected a deep respect and recognition. I felt a quiet happiness, a reassurance that the lessons of the turning point were taking root. Later, as I sat alone with a cup of tea, I reflected on all the small moments: the forgotten birthday, the overlooked effort, the heartfelt letter, and the gradual shift that followed. Each moment, each emotion, had shaped a path toward understanding, empathy, and renewed connection. I realized that relationships are not static. They require attention, reflection, and consistent care. And sometimes the most meaningful turning points are quiet, almost invisible, but they change everything. Over the next few months, our home felt different. Not louder, not busier, just warmer. There were still chores, still long days, still the same routines. But there was also presence. Terrence didn't just exist beside me anymore. He participated. He asked questions. He listened. He offered to help without me having to list out what needed doing. Some mornings I'd find a sticky note on the fridge with simple words like, "Thank you for dinner last night," or, "I see how much you do, Amani." They were small gestures, but to me, they meant everything. Because love, I had come to realize, doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be dramatic or extravagant. It just needs to be noticed. One evening, I was tucking Alani into bed when she looked at me and asked, "Mom, are you happy again?" Her words caught me off guard. I sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her curls gently. "What makes you ask that, baby?" She smiled sleepily. "Because you and Daddy laugh more now. You talk more. The house feels nicer." I kissed her forehead softly. "Yes, baby. Mommy's happy." As I turned off the light and walked down the hallway, those words echoed in my mind. Mommy's happy. I hadn't said that out loud in a long time. Terrence and I began having small traditions again, things we'd lost somewhere along the way. Sunday morning breakfast together, evening walks around the block after dinner, simple talks about our days. It wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was about rebuilding slowly, with intention. One night during one of those walks, Terrence reached for my hand. "You know," he said, looking at the quiet streetlights ahead, "I didn't realize how much I had been missing until I almost lost it." I looked at him, the calm breeze brushing against our faces. "Sometimes," I said softly, "you don't realize what you have until it's silent, until the love that once filled the space starts to fade." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "I'll never take that silence for granted again." And for once I believed him. But healing isn't a straight line. Some days the old habits crept in, the forgotten chores, the distracted responses. And some days I'd feel that ache of being unseen again. But instead of letting it sit and grow, I began speaking up, calmly, honestly. "Terrence," I'd say gently, "I need you to see me right now. I need help." And he'd pause, listen, and respond. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And progress, in a long marriage is sometimes the most sacred kind of love there is. Then came our next anniversary. A few days before, I noticed Terrence acting a little secretive. He'd whisper to the kids, tuck away little things when I entered the room, and smile to himself. I didn't ask questions. I'd learned to let moments unfold naturally. On the evening of our anniversary, I came home from work and smelled something wonderful. Candlelight flickered from the dining room, and the soft sound of old jazz played from a small speaker. Alani and Zion came running to the door. "Mom, you have to close your eyes." I laughed softly. Okay, I'm closing them. Terrence led me inside, his hand gentle on my shoulder. "All right," he said with a quiet pride in his voice. "Now open them." When I opened my eyes, the table was beautifully set. Nothing fancy, just our everyday plates, but placed with care. In the center was a small cake, and around it, the kids had written on little paper hearts, "Thank you, Mom. We love you. You make our home special." I stood still, taking it all in. Terrence looked at me and said, "I didn't forget this year. I'll never forget again, not just the date, but what it means. Because every day I come home, I see what you've built. Not just this house, but this love." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. All the nights I had stayed awake, the tears I had hidden, the quiet exhaustion, they felt seen, honored, and understood. I hugged him tightly, my voice soft against his shoulder. "Thank you for seeing me," he whispered back. "I should have seen you long ago." Later that night, after the kids were asleep, we sat on the porch again, the same porch where we'd once had that painful silence between us. The night was warm, and the sky was a deep velvet blue. Fireflies flickered faintly in the yard. "You know what's strange?" I said quietly. "I thought the hurt would always stay with me. But lately it feels lighter." Terrence nodded, sipping his tea. "Maybe because you let me in again. Maybe because we both stopped keeping score," I smiled faintly. "Maybe." He turned toward me, his tone thoughtful. "I used to think love was about doing big things. Surprises, grand gestures. But I see now it's in the small things. The late-night talks, the shared laughs, the way we keep showing up for each other." I looked out into the dark, the sound of crickets rising and falling. "Love," I said softly, "is about remembering, not just the moments that made us smile, but the moments that almost broke us, and choosing to stay anyway." He reached over, resting his hand on mine. "And I'm staying," he whispered. "Every day I'm choosing to stay." As the months turned into a year, our home became a place of renewed warmth. Terrence began helping Alani with her school projects, something he had rarely done before. Zion started baking on weekends with me, laughing as he sprinkled too much sugar on everything. I watched them, realizing that love had quietly reshaped our home. It wasn't perfect, but it was present. One night, while folding laundry, the same way I had the night Terrence gave me that letter, I found another small note tucked into one of his shirts. It said simply, "For every night you stayed awake, I see you now." "Thank you." I sat there holding the note, tears welling up again. But this time, they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of peace. Because being seen, truly seen, can heal wounds that years of silence once deepened. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the flowers, not the parties, not the grand words, but the simple, quiet recognition of someone's effort. The moment when one heart finally says to another, "I see you." I remember that's what I hold on to now. Not the birthday he forgot, but the love he learned to remember. And maybe that's enough. Terrence nodded, sipping his tea. "Maybe because you let me in again. Maybe because we both stopped keeping score," I smiled faintly. "Maybe." Sometimes I sit alone on the porch after everyone's asleep. The quiet hum of the night fills the air, the same sound that once felt heavy with loneliness. But now it feels different. It feels peaceful. I watch the soft flicker of the porch light, the same light that used to guide me back home after long days, and I think about everything we've been through, the forgotten moments, the silent tears, the unspoken love. I used to believe that love meant giving until you were empty. That if I just tried hard enough, worked long enough, stayed patient long enough, things would fall into place. But life taught me something different. Love isn't about running yourself dry so someone else can shine. It's about partnership, being seen, being heard, and being valued. When Terrence forgot my birthday, it wasn't just a missed date on a calendar. It was the moment I realized how far we had drifted, how invisible I had started to feel. But it was also the moment that woke both of us up. Sometimes pain does that. It shakes you out of routine. It forces you to look at what you've built, or what you've lost, and decide whether it's worth rebuilding. And for us, it was. Now, on my birthday each year, Terrence always makes sure it's remembered, but more importantly, he remembers me every day, in small, quiet ways. A cup of tea waiting when I wake up. The sound of him helping the kids with dinner. The way he says, "You rest, baby." I got this. It's not about perfection, it's about effort. We don't erase the past, we learn from it. And the truth is, sometimes forgetting leads to remembering what truly matters. If someone had told me years ago that a forgotten birthday would change everything, I would have laughed. But now I see it clearly. That day wasn't the end of love. It was the beginning of awareness. Because love isn't proven by remembering special dates. It's proven by remembering the person standing beside you every single day. So, if you're listening to this story tonight, maybe you felt unseen too. Maybe you've given your heart, your time, your care, and felt it go unnoticed. Maybe you've cried quietly, wondering if anyone truly sees how hard you try. Let me tell you this. Your effort matters. Even if it goes unspoken, even if it's forgotten sometimes, it matters. And the right people in time will see it. They'll remember the nights you stayed awake. They'll see the sacrifices you made in silence. And they'll thank you. Maybe not with words, but with changed actions. That's what happened with me and Terrence. Our love didn't need to start over. It just needed to be seen again. And now, every time he looks at me with that quiet understanding, every time the kids laugh in the kitchen, every time we share a small meal with gratitude, I remember why I stayed. Not because love was perfect, but because it was real. Sometimes the deepest kind of love isn't loud or glamorous. It's quiet. It's consistent. It's the kind that grows roots in the soil of forgiveness. And as I sit here tonight, watching the moonlight fall gently over our porch, I whisper to myself, I'm glad I stayed long enough to be seen. Because now I am. And that is everything.